Today's readings in the first week of Advent touch upon, in a sense, death and judgment, the end of times. And I had a really difficult time writing this homily, and I couldn't understand why it was so hard. Then it hit me. Why am I hesitating to affirm Christ's own teachings? Is he not God? Do I not believe everything that he said while he was on this earth? And why am I hesitating to preach what the church teaches? Are we not all professed Catholics? Do we not believe everything that the church teaches us? The moment I realized that, I had a great peace and it just flowed. In today's gospel, Jesus warns us about a judgment day. He said, "Beware that your hearts do not become drowsy from carousing and from drunkenness and the daily anxieties of life, and that day catch you by surprise like a trap. Be vigilant at all times." Advent is a time of preparation. It comes from the words ad venire in Latin, means towards the coming. We look towards the coming of Christ. And it's interesting because the first 2 weeks of Advent, we don't talk about the nativity. We don't remember the first coming. We look towards the second coming. At the end of our times, with the question in mind, am I ready to stand before God? If I were to die today, would I be ready to stand before the Son of Man in judgment? We just had a class this last week on the 4 last things, and I was surprised how few people knew what these were. I shouldn't have been surprised because I didn't know what they were until I was in seminary when I was 21 years old. But the 4 last things: death, judgment, heaven, and hell. This basic Catholic teaching. It's the final 4 phases every state must come towards, every soul. We will all die, and at the moment of our death, we will all undergo a judgment. And based on that judgment, there are 2 destinations we can go: eternal life in heaven or eternal hell. Jesus spoke about this more than anything else he spoke about while he was on earth. He said, "When the Son of Man comes in his glory," he's talking about the end times, "he will say to those at his right hand, 'Come, O blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you.' And he will say to those at his left hand, 'Depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devils and his angels. And they will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life.'" Death, judgment, heaven, hell. That's our faith. That's what Jesus taught. And that is why Jesus Christ was so adamant in today's gospel. Be vigilant at all times, for you do not know the day that the reckoning will come. I had a high school friend who was obsessed with 2012. I don't know if you remember that scare of the world's going to end in 2012 according to the Aztec calendars and all that. The last time I ever spoke to him, we were in my apartment. It was 2008. We were both college students. In the last discussion I had with him, he was telling me on why he was convinced that 2012 would be the end. Later that year, in 2008, I went away to seminary, and I lost contact with him. But from the last thing I heard, he had slowly lost his faith, stopped living a moral life, and I didn't hear about him for a very long time, until January of 2013. I received a phone call from another person I knew who was in tears, informing me that my friend had been working on a job site and he had fallen from very high. He lost his life in the fall at 23 years old. And all I could think about in that moment was the last conversation I ever had with him and his conviction that the world was going to end in 2012. Well, the world did not come to an end, but for him, it did. And I can only pray that he was ready to stand before the Son of Man when that happened. Christ warns us, be vigilant. Every Advent, the church echoes his words in the first 2 weeks as we look towards the second coming. Be vigilant. Think about the coming of Christ and ask yourselves, am I ready to stand before the Son of Man? Is my life in proper order? Am I ready for judgment? Is there any sin in my life that I've not brought to confession, that I'm still holding on to? Is there any belief that I hold that is contrary to Catholic teaching? That is why during Advent we always have penance services, extra times for confession. It's a special time to examine our life and ask ourselves, looking forward at the end and saying, am I ready for the coming of Christ? Because if I'm ready now, then I'm ready to encounter Christ in the Nativity. That's the secret. If I'm looking ahead and ready to encounter him at the hour of my death, I can encounter him now when he is born into this world. I don't know if you've ever heard of a woman named Gloria Polo. She was a dentist who lived in Colombia, 24 years old, very beautiful woman. But on May 5th, 1995, she was walking with her husband and her cousin across the street when she and her cousin were struck by lightning. They were both pronounced dead on arrival. Her cousin did die, but she herself was resuscitated just a couple days later. But when she woke as a woman, not as the same woman that had been walking down the street just the day before. She awoke as a woman who had just undergone her judgment and had been found wanting. After she died, she felt she was falling into a darkness. And she just instinctively began to cry out, have mercy on me. I'm a Catholic. Have mercy on me. I'm a Catholic. And she said that all of a sudden she found herself standing before this great light. She couldn't see anyone. It was just this great light. And the most beautiful voice that she'd ever heard spoke to her. It said, are you a Catholic? And she said, yes, I'm a Catholic. Can you tell me the 10 Commandments? She goes, no, but I live them. He goes, you live the 10 Commandments? Yes. But before she could say another word, her entire life began to flash before her eyes. In a way that she said she had no power anymore to rationalize everything that she had done in life that for so long she convinced herself was okay. She saw the truth, and there was no hiding from it. She later spoke about this moment. She said, I was a cafeteria Catholic, believing some teachings and not others. In my youth, a priest told me that hell didn't exist. And I thought to myself, if there is no hell, then we all go to heaven. And thus, what do I have to be afraid of? After that, she stopped following church teachings. She said she believed very much in abortion. She passed out contraceptives to young people who came to her dentist clinic. She didn't go to Mass on most Sundays, relationships outside of marriage. Basically, she was no different than any of the pagans around her in her life. And by the end of her vision, she could no longer declare that she was Catholic in the presence of this great light. The voice came to her in that moment in judgment saying, I was not your God. You were your own God, and you believed and acted according to what you yourself wanted. And her story is far too long to go into right now, and I invite you all to look it up on yourself. Her name was Gloria Polo. She was given a chance to come back, to remind anyone who would listen of the reality of the judgment that we must all go through at the moment of our death, to call people to conversion. That's what Advent is all about. Looking towards the coming of Christ and asking ourselves, am I ready to stand before the Son of Man? Is there anything in my life or in my beliefs that are contrary to what Christ himself taught, what the Catholic Church professes? Now is the time for conversion. For as Christ says, be vigilant at all times and pray that you have strength to stand before the Son of Man, because he is coming, now in the Holy Eucharist, then at the hour of our death. And the most beautiful truth I live by every day is that if I'm ready to stand before the Son of Man, body, blood, soul, and divinity on this altar today, I will be ready to face him at the hour of my death.